Hey friends, this is Jacob with Alcolock, and today we're going to talk about a few different points. We're going to talk about DMV suspensions with your license, when you get your license reinstated, how that process works, limited driving privileges, ignition interlocks, and then a few other points along the way. So we're going to start with when you need an ignition interlock and when you don't, and how this will be incorporated with how long your DMV suspension will be. So North Carolina is a modified first offender state. That means that not all first-time convictions are going to need an ignition interlock. 36 states are, but that's not that way in North Carolina. So in North Carolina, if it's your first conviction within a 7-year time frame, you have to blow at least a .15 before you would need an ignition interlock. And if you were to need an ignition interlock, you would need it for 1 year. All first convictions within a 7-year time frame are going to lose their license through the DMV for 1 year. It doesn't matter if you blew a .08, if you refused, or if you were a .15 or higher, you would still lose your license for a 1-year time frame from the NCDMV. All right, now if it is your second conviction within a 3-year time frame, you lose your license through the DMV for a 4-year period, but after 2 years, you're eligible for what's called a DMV hearing, and we'll get to those in a little bit. And then once you're able to get your license back, you would need an ignition interlock for a 3-year time frame. Now, if you have 2 DWI convictions within a 3 to 7 year time frame, you lose your license for 1 year and you would need the ignition interlock for 1 year. Now, if you have 3 or more DWI convictions within a 7-year time frame, 5-year time frame, you would get what's called a permanent revocation. This means that you're never able to get your license back through the NCDMV unless you first have a DMV hearing. You're eligible for that DMV hearing after 4 years. Now, at this hearing, once you get approved for it and you're able to get your license back, you would need the ignition interlock for a 7-year period. Now, it's really important to kind of note out here, our first conviction within a 7-year time frame, you only need an ignition interlock if you blow a 1.5 or higher. When we jump up to 2 or more convictions within a 7-year time frame, there is no BAC requirement. So you could have blown a .08 for both of your DWIs, you could have blown .15s, or they could have both been refusals or from some form of narcotic. The state doesn't see a difference between drugs driving and drunk driving, so there is no BAC limit for those. So if you have multiple convictions within a 7-year time frame, it doesn't matter what else may be going on with the case, you would have to have an ignition interlock in order to get your license back. And back in the day, this used to be court mandated. So needing an ignition interlock, it was part of your plea agreement with the judge, and you would set it up with your attorney. Well, now the DMV decides if you have to have an interlock in your car or not. So there's no real way around it. There's nothing that your attorney can do in most cases. There's nothing I could do or your counselor could do because the state sets it. So it's really black and white. If you need it, you need it. If you don't, you don't. So this chart right here should give you a really good idea of, am I gonna have to have an ignition interlock in my car to get my license back, or will I not? right, the next thing that we're going to go over is going to be limited driving privileges. And this typically only pertains to people if you have one DWI conviction within a 7-year time frame. And it's a limited driving privilege, but we're going to call it an LDP for short. Like I said earlier, if you have one conviction within 7 years, you lose your license for 1 year through the DMV no matter what. But we have limited driving privileges, and the point of them is so that that first conviction is not an undue duress on you. So it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a privilege granted to you by the court so that you can drive within certain time frames during that 1 year suspension. That way we can still get to work, pick up our kids, get gas, all that good stuff. So to kind of break down a limited driving privilege, I'm going to draw a timeline up here. And this is the timeline for a DWI. And we're going to start with the first step. And the first step in any DWI conviction is the initial charge. So this is charge. Now, after you're charged with a DWI, you lose your license for a 30-day period. There is something called a pretrial license where you would lose your license for 10 days and then be able to drive that remaining 20 days. But I imagine most of you in group today are at least already past that 30-day period. Then after we get our license back, you would go to the clerk of court, you'd pay $100 and get your license. After that, we have a dotted line. And this dotted line is conviction. This is where you're actually found guilty in the court. It's a dotted line because if somehow, you get your case dismissed, you don't have to worry about this. You would get your license back because there is no guilty verdict. But after that 30-day period, in between conviction, you can drive just like normal because you're innocent until proven guilty. So this time frame, it could be 30 days, it could be 3 years. It all depends on how many continuances you get, your attorney, getting the judge that he likes to deal with, a whole bunch of different things. So you're able to drive, but then once you're convicted, that's when everything changes. That's when your 1 year conviction through the DMV would start. And that doesn't matter if you blew a .08 or if you blew a .15. You're going to lose your license through the DMV if found guilty of the DWI. So for 365 days, you're not going to have a license through the Department of Motor Vehicles. But a limited driving privilege is going to give you access to driving during this time frame. Now, limited driving privileges typically are Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. Now, this isn't something that's set in stone. I've seen plenty of limited driving privileges that are 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. It all depends on when you work and what your needs are. So talk to your attorney about it before you get your license or your limited driving privilege signed by the judge. Because once the judge signs it, it's much harder to go back and get them to change it later. So if you're in this process right here and you're thinking about getting a limited driving privilege, if you haven't been convicted yet, I would go ahead and talk to your attorney about it beforehand so you can start getting together any documents that you may need. Now, if you blew under a .15, so you blew a 149 or a .08, you're eligible for your limited driving privilege the day that you're convicted. Right there. So you could be convicted, go to the clerk of court, get that limited driving privilege, and drive home from court that day. And your limited driving privilege, no matter when it started, is always only active for 365 days. So your limited driving privilege will always expire on the 1 year anniversary of your conviction date. So let's say you're convicted February 1st of 2020. That means your limited driving privilege, regardless of when it started, will expire on February 1st of 2021. So if you blew under a 1.5, you get your limited driving privilege the day that you're convicted, and it starts that day. You lose your license to the DMV for 1 year, but you have the privilege that entire year, and then at this point, you would get your license back. So you never go a single day without being able to drive, or at least having that privilege. Now, if you blew a 1.5 or higher, you have to wait 45 days before you're able to get that limited driving privilege. So this is something you want to go ahead and be aware of now. If you know that you blew a 1.5 or higher, or you get your blood work back and it's a 1.5 or higher, go ahead and talk with your favorite Uber driver, your grandma, your uncle. Someone's going to have to help you get around during that 45-day period. Now, since you blew a 1.5 or higher, even if you waited out your entire suspension and when you went to go get your license back, you would have to have the interlock in your car to get it back. You're going to need the interlock in your car before they'll give you a limited driving privilege. So I always suggest getting it installed in your car a day or two before you're convicted. Sometimes people will get the interlock put in their car before they're convicted or the day that they're convicted. You're able to do that if you would like, but just know your year with the interlock that you have to have, it doesn't start until your privilege becomes active. So if you put it in too early, you're kind of paying for nothing because that year won't start until that 45th day. And this is where things can get a little confusing, but it pertains to everyone. When we go back to when it expires, the limited driving privilege, like I said, it expires on the 1-year anniversary of your conviction date. Right here. If you have the interlock in your car, that means for 320 days, because it didn't start until 45 days after you were convicted, you have a limited driving privilege, and in this case, the court is your monitoring authority. But you need the ignition interlock for 365 days total. You have to be getting credit for it for a full year. So on this day, you go and get your license back. That means the interlock doesn't come out of your car until 45 days after you've gotten your license back, to make it 365 days total. It's really, really important that we remember on the day that our limited driving privilege expires, on that 1-year anniversary, we need to get to the DMV and get our license reinstated. Really, really important tip, and that goes for anyone. It doesn't matter what you blew. If you have that limited driving privilege, really important to get to the DMV on that day, because let's say your limited driving privilege is 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and you've been driving around for either 365 days or 320, it's really easy to forget that you don't actually have a license. You have a limited driving privilege. And let's say you forget to go to the DMV for 2 weeks. During this time right here, you forget for 2 weeks. Well, if you get pulled over during that 2 weeks, you don't have a limited driving privilege and your license hasn't been reinstated. And if you were to get pulled over, the charge would be a driving while license revoked. And in that case, you have to have another assessment, another attorney, and if you're found guilty of it, it's a whole another year suspension. So it's a really common mistake, and it's a really easy mistake for us to make. So just remember, that date is going to be in the top right-hand corner of your limited driving privilege. As soon as you get it, or the day that you're convicted, just put something in your calendar on your phone to make sure you get to the DMV on that day, that 1-year anniversary date. If that date falls on the weekend, so a Saturday or a Sunday, you would have to wait until the following Monday to go get your license reinstated. So just don't drive that day. Have someone drive you to the DMV that Monday and then get your license reinstated. Really, really important thing to remember. Okay, next we're going to go over DMV hearings. You would need a DMV hearing if you have 2 convictions within a 3-year time frame. You would lose your license for 4 years, but if you don't want to wait that whole 4 years, after 2 years, you're able to go to the DMV, have a hearing, and try and get your license back after 2 years. If you were to wait that full 4 years out, you wouldn't need a DMV hearing. You would just be eligible after that 4 years is up. If you have 3 convictions within a 5-year time frame, you'll always have to have a DMV hearing because you have that permanent revocation. So hearings, the point of them is to prove that you're safe to drive, and oftentimes it's to prove your sobriety. That's what the DMV hearings, the hearing officer is looking for. It's kind of like court, but inside your local DMV. There's not a judge there, it's just what's called a DMV hearing officer, and it's just them. The hearings typically are in 2 parts, so you have 2 meetings with the DMV hearing officer. The initial hearing will be what's called the pre-hearing. And each DMV officer, depending on where you live in the state, because each hearing officer handles a certain region, they want different things. So a lot of them will ask for three witnesses, and that's usually 3 people who know you and can testify to the fact that you are remaining sober, you are safe to drive, different things like that. Oftentimes they like some form of documentation to prove your sobriety, whether that's in a form of mobile monitoring, but that's something to kind of look over or talk about whenever you are with your DMV hearing officer. And then at this hearing, they'll set the dates of your official hearing, and that the official hearing, that's when they'll determine either A, yes, we're going to let you get your license back, or B, no. So they'll make a decision at the official hearing. Now, DMV hearings used to be free. That's no longer the case. Now, hearings are roughly $650. Oftentimes, you'll pay $250 down, and then if they approve you, you pay that remaining $400. And this is a good chunk of change. Not everybody always has $650 just laying around, but we don't want this to be a roadblock for you to get your license back and get back driving legally. So there's an option for you. Definitely something worth looking into because it's free to file for it. It's what's called an affidavit of indigence. And it is what the name implies. It's based on your income. They will decide, yes, you have to pay that full $650, or no, you don't have to pay any of it. But it's not a black or white concept. There are regions in between. So you may make too much money for them to waive it completely, but they may take $100 off, $200 off, $300 off. So it's a really good idea to file for this. Even if it only saves you $100, why not do it? The way that you get to it, the way you find this affidavit of indigence, is on the same website that you'll go to print off the form to file for the hearing itself. The best way to get to it is go to Google and then just type in DMV hearing form. And the first link that will come up, it's an NCDOT website. So I can't remember the beginning of it, it's really long, but it'll be ncdot.com. And that first link that comes up, there's a whole bunch of forms, and they have some numbers on them. The form that you need to request the hearing itself is the F001 form. Then if you scroll all the way to the bottom, That's where you'll find a form that just says affidavit of indigence, and you print that out, you fill it out. The documentation that it requires is going to be listed up there, so W-2s or 2 paychecks, things like that. Just print it out, fill it out, and take it to your local DMV. It'll take them about 30 days to process that, but it could save you the full $650 if need be. So let's talk a little bit more about these hearings. Because it's not court, driving is a privilege. There's no civil rights violations that really can occur. The DMV hearing officer could deny you for any reason, and they don't have to give you the reason that they denied you. So you really want to take it serious. I'd say the biggest mistake that people make when it comes to the hearings is not realizing how serious it is. You're going to go in and they're going to ask you typically a series of questions. You know, how long have you been sober? Do you keep alcohol in your house? Have you changed friends? Who your support system is? So you really want to kind of look into it and be prepared for it. You know, some DMV hearing officers won't allow an attorney into the hearing room. Some will. So if you wanted to have an attorney, you definitely could consult with them, but I would look for an attorney that's in your area so that they'll know how that DMV hearing officer for that region normally does things. Now, hearings aren't just for license reinstatement. You may also need a hearing if you have an ignition interlock in your car and you were to get multiple what's called violations. So if you were to fail a test or skip a test when it asked for one, they could call you in there for it. So if you have to have an ignition interlock, and this is kind of jumping forward a little bit, but if you ever have a violation, you'll get a training manual when you first get it installed. But you want to write down notes. So if you ever have a violation, write down the time that it occurred. Write down what was happening when it occurred. Those hearings used to be free as well, and that is also no longer the case. They were about $450. And if they were to request a hearing, they just send you a letter in the mail, and oftentimes you only have 10 days to respond to that hearing. So you really want to keep up. Anytime a violation occurs, you just want to keep up with when it occurred, write down notes, and make sure the DMV has your correct address. That way, if they were to send you a letter in the mail, it's going to the right place. All right, let's move on from here. We're going to talk a little bit more in detail about ignition interlocks themselves. So each state is a little bit different, and we will be focusing on North Carolina. So because it's a state charge, each state handles their ignition interlock program a little bit different. So if you were convicted outside of North Carolina, this may or may not apply to you. You could give me a call if you were convicted and wanted to know more about your state specifically. Well, let's go over some things that are very specific to North Carolina and kind of make North Carolina unique as far as how they handle their ignition interlock or how the state sets the policies. Oh, that's not right. So a big difference between North Carolina and some other states is our BAC restrictions on the ignition interlock. If you have a limited driving privilege or you have multiple convictions within a 7-year time frame, you'll be set at a .00. That means that anything over, technically, over a .007 is going to be a fail, or a .00. So any amount of alcohol is going to be a violation. If it's your first DWI conviction and the DMV is your monitoring authority, you would be set at a 0.04. So that means if a 0.039 detection, your car will still crank. It wouldn't be a violation. So this can be a little confusing, and I'm going to reference back to the timeline that I drew. If you have a limited driving privilege, you get convicted, and then your limited driving privilege doesn't start for 45 days. And then you have a limited driving privilege for 320 days. During that time, the court's the monitoring authority. That last 45 days with the interlock, the DMV is. So this right here, when the court is your monitoring authority, that's when you're 0.00. When you transition over to your actual license and the DMV is your monitoring authority, it would go up to 0.04. And I'll reference back to when the court is your monitoring authority here in a minute. Just know, if you have a limited driving privilege, that's the only time that the court is your monitoring authority. All other ignition interlock programs, the DMV is. That's when you have your actual license, the DMV is your monitoring authority. Something else that is unique. If you were convicted after October of 2015, if the DMV is your monitoring authority, it has to be installed in every vehicle that is registered in your name. So if you had 5 cars, before the DMV would issue you a license, you would have to have an ignition interlock installed in all 5 cars. But there are a few legal options for that in case you didn't want to install an interlock in all 5 cars. If you have a limited driving privilege, for 320 days, the court's your monitoring authority, and typically a judge will sign your limited driving privilege as long as it's in 1 car. And then that last 45 days, DMV's your monitoring authority. They would say it has to be in all cars. So for 320 days, you'd only have to have it in 1 car. And then that last 45 days, that's when it would have to go in all of your cars. So it may save you some money to do it that way. Now, if the DMV is your monitoring authority and you have multiple cars, you can drop the tags and insurance on the vehicles that you're okay with not driving, and they'll only make you put it on the cars that have tags and insurance on it. You could transfer the title to someone else's name. Or you could file a waiver, and that's the affidavit of indigence too. And based on your income, you could have 5 cars. They'll say, okay, you only have to put it in 1 car. You don't have to drop your tags and insurance on the other ones. You just need to put it in this 1 car. And those are your options if the DMV is your monitoring authority. Now keep in mind, an ignition interlock, it's a restriction on your license. So my license says I have to have corrective lenses on, or contacts or glasses for my eyes. Doesn't matter what car I'm driving. I could be driving my car, I could be driving your car. As long as I have my contacts in, I'm okay to drive it. Same thing with interlocks. You can drive any vehicle that you want, but there has to be an ignition interlock in there. So even if you don't have a vehicle, that's okay. As long as you have someone who's willing to let you install it in their car, you're going to be fine. They'll still let you get your license back. But if you have 5 cars, if you want the option to drive any of those 5 cars, you would have to have the IID up there. If you're okay with just driving 1 or 2, just decide on the ones that you want to drive, install it, and then drop the tags and insurance, or transfer the title, or go through one of these measures. But that'll be the best way to save you some money if you don't want to put it in all 5 of your cars. The last important note for North Carolina: is that it has to be installed and calibrated in the state of North Carolina. And that doesn't seem like a huge deal, but in this next section, we'll go over how to use the device, and that I'll explain why that's important. All right, so we're going to go over how to use the device and how to use it on a daily and annual basis. And we'll go over starting your car. So the device is fairly simple. It just either prevents your car from starting if you have alcohol or you're over that threshold with alcohol in your breath, or it'll allow your car to start if you're under that level. So when you go to your vehicle, if you were to turn your key and not take a test, just nothing will happen. Your car won't crank. You have to take a test first. Before the vehicle will crank at all, you'll have to take it. And that kind of brings me to drinking the night before, because alcohol stays in our system way longer than you would ever think. You know, me personally, I am in recovery, so, you know, remaining abstinent is 120% the easiest way to, you know, keep your license in check, to save you money, and just make your life better all around. But if you are mindful enough to know that you may or may not still drink with dinner, and you have this in your car, you really have to be cognitive of the fact that alcohol is going to stick around longer than you would typically think. Especially for people who are set at a 0.00, which ends up being most people. You know, if you were to drink 4 beers from 11 to 12 at night, all within 1 hour, I can almost guarantee at 7:30 the next morning, you're going to fail a test. I see it happen day in and day out. So what happens if you fail a test while you're trying to crank the vehicle? Let's say you have to be at work at 8 o'clock and you go to your car at 7:30 and you blow to try and crank your car. But you fail. Anytime you fail a test trying to crank your car, it's going to lock you out for a 5-minute period. After that 5 minutes, it'll let you take another test. It's what's called the verification test. Very important to make sure you take that test, especially if you know that you failed, but you hadn't actually been drinking. And I'll get into topical fails here in a second. But you take that second test 5 minutes later. Well, if you've really been drinking, your body's not going to metabolize that alcohol within a 5-minute time frame. So you're going to fail that second test. Well, if you fail 2 tests in a row, that indicates that you do have a true blood alcohol concentration. And the device, with respect to North Carolina's rules and policies, it's going to lock you out for 45 minutes. So that means you can't even try and take another test until about 8:20. And you were supposed to be at work at 7:30. So if you have this in your car and you drink the night before, you're really rolling the dice with your employment if you were to choose to drink that night before. So we really want to be careful with that. Then once you start your car, you have to take what's called a rolling test. Once we crank our car, it's going to ask for a test completely at random. It'll always ask for the first test within 15 minutes, but then after that, it's completely random. It could be every 20 minutes. It could be every 60 minutes. You never really know. So if your motor is running, it can ask for a test at any time, so we want to be just mindful of the fact that we need to be listening out for the device. While our motor is running, when it's time to take a test, it's going to beep really loud, kind of like that, but every 2 seconds. And it's not going to stop until you blow and complete a test. When it asks for a test while we're driving, you have 5 minutes to blow and complete that test. If you don't complete the test within 5 minutes, that's what's considered a skipped test violation or a missed test. Now, you do have 5 minutes, so you could choose to pull over and take the test, and that's the easiest and safest way to take it, but you're not required to pull over and take it. You don't have to pull over and cut your car off to take that rolling test. You could, take it while you were driving, and this is designed to show you, this clip right here, kind of our dashboard. This is the steering wheel, and this is the radio. And this clip right here, it's a great idea to put it above our radio. So if we're driving, the clip would go right here. And it would sit just like this. And when it asks for a test, it's gonna beep really loud every 2 to 3 seconds. And this light's gonna flash and it'll say ready for test. So it's not as discreet sitting right there. So a lot of people often just have it sitting in their cup holder. But if you have your music all the way up and you're driving and you don't see it flashing, and your music's up and you also don't hear it, then you end up skipping a test. So if we have it sitting on our dashboard right here, even with our music all the way up, if we don't happen to hear it, we'll see it flashing out of our peripheral vision. So it's a good idea to put it there. North Carolina is based on what's called a Blum and hum system. And that means that you have to hum while you're blowing into it. And the reason that is back in the day, people used to stick air compressors in there to take a test for them, or hold it out the window to try and get it to take a test. So now to verify that it's a human, we have to sing into it really. And the best tip is sing the word who while we're blowing into it. So like, who, just like that. And on our device, it's gonna blow, you're gonna hear a click, you blow through the click, and when it goes doo-doo-doo, that's when you're done blowing, and you'll be good to go. All interlocks require 1.5 liters of air, so how long you blow, how hard you blow, that'll be the same no matter where you go, because the state sets that, but it's like this. And then if you pass your test, it'll say start engine. If you were driving, it would just say pass up there. But what happens if we fail a test while we're driving down the road? The car blows up. I'm just kidding. But in North Carolina, we don't require cameras or GPS like a lot of states. And in states that have GPS, cops would come to you, pull you over, and have you take another roadside test. In North Carolina, we don't have it, but what we do is your horn and lights are going to flash like an alarm while you're driving down the road. And they're not going to stop until you either take another test and pass or pull the vehicle over. So you could drive from Raleigh to Atlantic Beach and fail a test the whole way. The device will never cut your car off while the motor's running. It doesn't have that ability to. But your horn and lights aren't going to stop, and it's going to be really embarrassing. So that's how to use it, but let's go over how to maintain it, and how to maintain our reporting with the DMV. The DMV requires that every 60 days, you bring your vehicle back to one of our shops so we can calibrate the unit, make sure it's accurate, and download the information and send it to the DMV. North Carolina currently doesn't allow wireless devices, so there's no real-time reporting. So the DMV isn't able to see, what pass level you're at, how many times you start your car, all that good stuff, until you bring it back in, and then we send that information to them. Now, if you fail a test, the DMV wants to know what happened within a 5-day time frame. So if you get a violation, you have to bring the vehicle back within 5 days. So if you get a violation, or on that 60-day appointment, if we don't see you by the end of the day, a 5-day timer also comes up. If that timer gets to 0, the vehicle locks out and the vehicle's not going to crank. So it's really important, if you ever see that 5-day timer, make sure you get your car to our shop. All right. So the last thing that I'm going to go over is topical alcohols. If you've ever known someone who's had an interlock in their car, or if you've ever had one in the past, you've probably heard of someone failing on the device as a result of them not actually drinking beer, liquor, or wine. So we're really going to go over how that happens, why the device is so sensitive per se, and then some different things that could set the device off. All right. Woo. So this is me. And the device is meant to detect our BAC. And BAC stands for blood alcohol content. But we're not pricking our finger and sticking it on the device. We're not giving it blood. We are initially blowing into the device. So initially, it measures our BRAC, our breath alcohol content. But this is not a 1-to-1 conversion ratio. If your breath alcohol content's a 0.01, that doesn't mean your BAC is. So how do we determine what that conversion ratio is? And that really leads us to why the device could pick up a topical alcohol. Everything we eat, everything we drink is primarily digested in our small intestines. And then from there, it's going to take stuff to the blood. And alcohol's no different. And the blood's kind of the highway of the body. It takes things where it needs to go. Now, about 10% of the alcohol that we drink is digested in our liver. That's why we get cirrhosis and things like that. Or, sorry, 90%. But the other 10% is digested by exhaling it. So as the blood runs through our lungs, that alcohol would go into our lungs and then we would exhale it out. But when it's in our blood, and this is our BAC, it's a liquid. But when it goes to our lungs and we blow it out, well, now it's a gas. And alcohol, when it goes from a gas to a liquid, so when it goes this way, it's reduced by about 2,000. But we're going the opposite direction. We're going from, oh, no, sorry. When it goes from a liquid to a gas, it's reduced by about 2,000. But we're going that opposite direction because we're giving it our breath first, but we want to know what the blood alcohol concentration is. So it has to take that breath alcohol content and take the inverse of that. It has to multiply it by just over 2,000. And that's why if you've ever seen someone take one sip of alcohol and immediately blow into any breathalyzer, it would seem like a lot more than it really is. You would take one sip and then blow, and it would show that your blood alcohol content, your BAC, it's like a 0.19 or a 0.2. But you know that it's not that high from one sip or whatever it may be, and that's why. Because if you have any alcohol sitting directly in your mouth, your BAC is going to seem like a lot more than it really is. And the reason that happens is because if we have any contaminant sitting directly in our mouth and we blow over it, our breath is going to pick up some of those contaminants and blow it into a breathalyzer, and it's just going to multiply it. It's going to seem like a lot more. So the most important thing that I can tell you to do, if you have an interlock in your car, is make sure you take 2 sips of water and take 2 deep breaths before every single test. And the reason that is if we drink some water, as long as we get those contaminants down our throat, they're no longer in our mouth for us to blow them into the device. So really, really important. Next, let's go over a few different things that could cause topical fails. And the biggest one is bread. And I'm about to go over a whole long list of things. It'll seem like, man, I can't eat or drink anything while I'm driving my car. You can. Just make sure you get a case of water, put it in your car, and just always keep that water with you. So you can still eat bread. Just if you're eating bread and it asks for a test, drink some water first and you're good to go. But the reason bread could cause atopical alcohol is because bread has yeast and it has sugar. But we could take yeast and sugar and throw it in a bowl and it could sit there for 1,000 years and it's never going to spontaneously ferment. But in our saliva, we have an enzyme called amylase, and it just breaks down starches to smaller molecules, and it causes that fermentation. So anytime we eat bread in real time, ethanol is being created. It's essentially how beer is made. So it's not a false positive. It's really detecting alcohol. It's just not coming from the way that we would normally think of it. Fruit and fruit flavorings. When we think of wine, we think of grapes, but all fruit can be used to create some kind of alcohol that you could drink. And it's the products that are in it. Is citric acid, ethylene gas, and fructose. And those products are also found in things that have fruit flavorings. So you can't rinse your mouth out with a Diet Mountain Dew and wonder why it set it off. Really important that you rinse your mouth out with water specifically. And to backtrack just a little bit, when we were going over why North Carolina is unique in having a 0.00 fail level, that's because every other state is set at a 0.025. And the reason they set Interlocks at that level is not so that people can drink a little bit and still be able to drive. It's because 99.9% of all topical alcohols are between a 0.01 and a 0.02. These topical alcohols, they're something that happen on any breathalyzer, and that's why most states, give a little bit of wiggle room to mitigate that. But if you're at a 0.00, it's really something you do have to still keep in mind. If you're set at a 0.04, it'll be very hard to fail from one of these topical alcohols. Another one is vanilla. If you look at a bottle of vanilla extract, it has about 60% alcohol in there. Anything designed to freshen our breath. So toothpaste, mints, minty gums, mouthwash, those all have alcohol in them. Even if it says alcohol-free, it'll still have sugar alcohol in the ingredients. And this doesn't mean don't brush your teeth. I really want you to still keep brushing your teeth. Just after you do, drink some water and you'll be okay. The only product that I really suggest that you wait about 10 minutes from the time that you use it until you do take a test is mouthwash. And that's because mouthwash soaks into our gums a little bit, and we want to give it a little bit more time to dissipate. And the last one is aerosols, and this is why we say take 2 deep breaths before you blow into it. Anything that ends in OL is a type of alcohol. Propylene glycol, Lysol, Pine Sol, anything that's designed to smell good is going to typically have a high alcohol concentration. It's what those products use to disperse the scent into the air. So colognes, perfumes, if you can smell it, you're inhaling it. And we just don't want you to exhale it into the device and pick it up. So we say rinse your mouth out for these products and then take 2 deep breaths. That way if you inhaled any alcohol, we're going to exhale it before we take that test. Technically, menthol is a type of alcohol. Now, I've never seen a violation from a menthol cigarette, but I have seen violations from our lighters. And the reason that is lighters have butane and butanol in them. And when we light our lighters, sometimes we smell that gas. And if you smell it, you're inhaling it, Just crack your window, take a few deep breaths, and then take the test, and you're going to be fine. Now let's go over, what happens if you do get a violation. How do we prove that we hadn't really been drinking if we do get one of these topical fails? Going back to what I said earlier, anytime we fail a test, if we're starting our car, it locks us out for 5 minutes. If we're driving and there's a fail, it locks you out for 2 minutes. Taking that second test and passing it is what shows us and shows the DMV that you hadn't actually been drinking beer, liquor, or wine. Because if you had really been drinking, 2 to 5 minutes later, your body's not going to metabolize that alcohol and you would fail that second test. But if you fail from bread, fruit products, and aerosol, you're always going to pass 2 to 5 minutes later. Those alcohols dissipate just like that within seconds. So taking that second test, it's really the only proof that you have of, hey, I wasn't really drinking. I had passed. I passed when I started my car, and then 30 minutes later, I had a fail, but I hadn't started drinking during that time. Taking that second test is really the only proof you have, and you really want to make sure that you do that. Really, really important. Now, here at Alcolock, if you fail that first test, but 2 to 5 minutes later you pass, anytime there's a fail, you have to bring it back to the shop within 5 days, and that is a pain. But if you pass that second test, we don't charge that reset fee. And here in a second, I'll go over the pricing. But that's another reason why taking that second test is so important, so that you don't get charged that $35 reset fee. And that, they really can add up really fast. So taking that second test has more than one benefit. All right, the last thing we'll go over, this is pricing. So, it's a lot like getting your car inspected. The state says that you have to do it, but you have an option of where you go. Same thing with Interlocks. You can go to Alcolock, Smart Starter, Monotech. Those are the 3 providers that are approved in North Carolina. They just have to be North Carolina approved providers. But these are just some different things to ask about while you're calling around. Because you do have an option, it is always best to call around and figure out what's going to be best for you. If someone else is doing something that is going to be better for you, then go with them. It's great if you call me, but we want you to do what's going to be best for you. The biggest thing to ask about is the lease and how much you pay every month. You're essentially renting the device and paying for the monitoring on a monthly basis. So it's $65 monthly. Every month you would pay that. And you have an option to pay for 2 months at a time, and you only come back every 2 months if you want to. So that's 60-day mark. Or you could pay for 30 days at a time and come back in 30 days, or you could pay for 2 weeks at a time if you wanted to. A really, really important one that you do want to ask about is violations. How much do they charge for a reset fee? It's easy to say, hey, I'm never going to fail on the device. I'm sober, I don't drink. But those topical alcohols, they pop up. So it's something you want to make sure that you ask about. If you were to fail from actually drinking, or if it asked you for a test and you never tried to take that test in that 5-minute time frame and you skipped a test, you have to bring it back in within 5 days, and then that reset fee to reset it is $35. So that's something to keep in mind. That's why we don't want to skip test. You don't want to be drinking if you have it in your car, because if you do fail a test and you fail multiple in a row, that's what you would have to pay. Now, you have to bring it back within 5 days, and you could fail multiple times within that 5 days. It's not going to charge you every single time you were to fail. It's just if you fail a test, you bring it back in within 5 days, and then whenever you come back in, that's when you would pay that $35. Ask about whatever specials someone may be running. So it's free to install the device into your vehicle, free to remove it, so the labor to put it in or take it out is free, and then that first month that you have it in there, that first $65, that's also going to be free. So when you first come in, you really don't have to have any money with you. If you were to start the next month, you would come in a month later and then pay. If you didn't want to come back in for 2 months, then you would just go ahead and pay for the second month, and that's all you would have to pay then. And another thing to ask about is location. So we have a location within 50 miles of anywhere in North Carolina. So just kind of go to the website and figure out what's going to be the closest location. Now, if we do have any questions, or when it's time to set up the installation, or going forward, if you just have any questions about the process, about reinstatements, DMV hearings, this is my number, and this is my cell phone. It's 919-480-7836, and my name is Jacob Harding again, so feel free to call or text me. All right, so that is all that I have for today. Everyone stay safe during this quarantine with the coronavirus, and thank you for watching. If you've been following along with the worksheet that I also have, try and get that filled out. Make sure your name's up there and turn it into your counselor. Thank you.